Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to you by
Stand Up Fight Back Podcast. You should totally check out their latest episode with Will Potter.
As members of Congress were praising Dr. King for his law-breaking and civil disobedience, those exact same tactics, if they were done in the name of protecting animals, were being labeled as terrorism.
If you want to hear the whole episode, you can check it out at fightbackpodcast.com.
I highly recommend it. Go through their back catalog. There's some amazing stuff in there.
Again, that's fightbackpodcast.com.
This is episode 138.
Yeah, we talk with Kevin Van Meter. He was one of the lead organizers with the Modern Times Collective and main support for Connor Cash.
If you don't know much about Connor Cash, definitely stick down and listen to this. It's an amazing story that I think everyone should hear. What news and events do we have going on this week, Jordan?
July 3rd through July 5th at PR Springs, there is an Art for Action Skillshare Camp. And on July 11th through July 17th, there's a Colorado Plateau Defense Camp, the Book Cliffs. You can check out both of those. Those are being organized by Peaceful Uprising, so go to peacefuluprising.org. On July 18th through July 19th, the 2015 Toronto Anarchist Book Fair will be at the United Steelworkers Hall in Toronto, Ontario. So check those out.
If you have any events going on in your area, hey, drop us a line. We'll throw it out there for everyone. This week's listener shout-out is brought to us by Charlotte Malrich.
Charlotte just said that we could do whatever we want. Again.
You know, Charlotte's just awesome.
Check out Among Animals. It's a book she contributed to with her short story, Me.
I wanted to give a shout-out to just everyone that's actually getting out off their asses and doing something. Doesn't matter what the fuck you're doing, you're just doing something. Whether that's protesting, organizing, helping, just get off your ass. And if you are, this shout-out's for you.
Thanks so much, Charlotte.
For the Slingshot this week, July 3rd, 1982. I'm almost one. You're not born yet. But
you're older than me.
I know, yeah. That is when Mumia was convicted of shooting a cop.
He could totally use your support, by the way. Just throwing it out there. He recently went to the hospital and his family was being denied visitation, a lot of fucked up things. So send letters of support and love his way for sure.
I sincerely hope you enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
So how's your day going?
It is going. It's quite hot out here in Portland, Oregon. I chose the Northwest because of the cool summers, but we've lost that thanks to global warming. So,
yeah, Utah's been super strange as well lately. Like our winter was next to none, and we usually have a lot of snowfall, and then it was raining like all last month, which is not normal, and now it's just hot as fuck.
Yep, and gonna get hotter and continue to be hot. So, unfortunately.
You know, the only extended amount of time I spent in the Pacific Northwest was at the Red Cloud Thunder tree sit. They did an action camp, and I was there for a couple weeks. But it rained nonstop when that was going on.
Well, sadly, that did not happen this past winter. So Mount Hood and the Cascades in general are at about 20% of where they should be in regards to snowpack. So not only did we not have the rain that we expected, we didn't have the snowpack development. So there's some real ecological concerns that we'll be facing not just this summer, but going into the future. So all that beautiful, beautiful rain that you saw is hopefully not a thing of the past, but certainly something has changed over the last few years.
Yeah, that's interesting because we're at about 1/5 of our normal water table too.
Mm-hmm.
And
this year.
even
Yeah.
with it raining all last month, like,
Yeah.
we only got like 5% back.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
How are the farms looking? Because I just drove through Western Washington and it looked post-apocalyptic. I mean, corn should be knee-high by 4th of July, and it was all dead. So,
Well, most of our farming is like alfalfa, so that all looks fine right now.
alfalfa for what? Feed?
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah, mostly
Yeah.
feed. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's the vast majority of our farming out here.
no
So,
kidding. And
yeah.
are they doing grazing out there too?
They do lots of the what do they call it? The
BLM.
federal land
Yeah.
grazing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's probably the majority of it.
That's the majority of the grazing that happens out here. Yeah.
Well, as a vegan anarchist podcast, I'm sure you guys can rant on about that. So,
And
bit.
boy, have we.
because it's bad news. I'll have to go back and listen to some old episodes to make sure I catch up on the situation in Utah, which I know very little about, being a New Yorker originally and now being a myopic Pacific Northwesterner.
Well, we really don't talk about Utah too much, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of like wherever the
Anyone
guest
else
is. Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of radical action going through there with threats of pipeline development and various other things. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, definitely.
Like
Lots of tar sands.
the tar sands
resistance.
resistant stuff.
and-
Yeah, there's lots of that. Yeah.
Rad.
Yeah.
I also not gotten an update on that. So once again, I will not trouble you.
They're having some action camps coming up too.
Oh, no shit. Nice.
Yeah,
They do. They're on top of shit.
they really are. I mean, let's be
Yeah,
honest. I'm not.
they're on
Yeah,
top of shit.
they really are.
So
Yeah,
awesome.
one of the fellows who edited the collection that the collection of which the chapter I wrote is in, that we'll be talking about in a bit, is actually out there in Utah working with both indigenous folks and cowboys to stop the pipeline. So.
Yeah, he was at our camp out that we did out there.
yeah.
He wrote he wrote the first chapter. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Can I say his name? Will. If not, then
yeah.
I can cut it out.
You can say Will. I think that's good enough.
All right.
yeah, yeah. No, he's a great guy.
Super. Awesome.
Yeah, and doing very interesting and important work, getting beyond the usual suspects and out of the subcultural ghetto that is radical politics to connect with folks who are really going to suffer from this pipeline, both indigenous and, of course, other folks out there, but primarily indigenous. So it's super exciting work.
Yeah, I was like last time I was talking to him, I was really impressed with how he is collaborating and bringing like the two worlds together.
Mm-hmm.
I say it's more than two. He's not just bringing two worlds; it's more like 3 or 4
Yeah, he's a
worlds
badass.
together. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, yeah, we went to tar sands.
Here we are.
So how long have you been out in the Pacific Northwest?
7 days. I lived here for
7 days.
It's a little bit of a story. I have been at the University of Minnesota, finishing a doctorate in geography for the last 3 years. My partner is here in the Northwest, and I was here for 6 years prior to returning to grad school, which is a terrible life decision for anyone listening. I basically have just gotten back, and now I'm back here permanently, or as work comes permanently. Hopefully I can get some teaching work or nonprofit or really any kind of work while I'm out here, so I can stay. Otherwise, I'll be looking elsewhere for teaching work and such. So yeah, me being back for 7 days is my return to the Northwest. But I'm somewhat familiar with various social movements out here. I spent a lot of time during those 6 years working with various groups. And I'm just now reconnecting with Portland Solidarity Network that I work with, and we do wage theft and anti-slumlord actions, and I'll be connecting with the local Anarchist Black Cross folks who are all really fantastic here too. So though I've been gone for 3 years, I've been in touch with a lot of the comrades and others out here. And were either of you out at the Resistance Ecology?
No, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I missed that as well, but every single year it's fantastic, and they're predominantly animal rights focused and organized, but they've been really good about connecting to related movements, ecological, of course, but some pipeline stuff, land issues, and the like. So sadly, none of us were there, but their videos are already starting to pop up online, so a lot of those really fantastic workshops will be getting out there to the world.
Yeah, we just had Eric McDavid on, and he was out there presenting too.
Yes, I'm super sad that I missed both meeting him and seeing him speak. But you had him on just the previous show, right?
I think like 2 shows ago, I think is what it was. Yeah.
Oh, rad.
Yeah.
He's got a hell of a story to tell, and the lessons of which I'm sure are going to be important for looking at repression going forward. So that's rad that you guys had him.
So what does one do with a doctorate in geology?
Oh, geography.
Geography, sorry.
Geology would be totally useful for something else. I do human geography, so I would basically be an American studies or political scientist or various other things, but geography gave me money, so I decided to become a geographer. There's also jobs in geography where there are not jobs in various other social sciences, and my goal was basically getting out of a long-term shitty job situation in Portland, and this became available. So I'm going to go off and teach, hopefully on a community college level, because that's really the population students I want to work with. And we basically are interdisciplinary. So my work looks at how political ideas emerge and then move and change as they move.
Okay.
Specifically, I will be studying autonomous Marxism. So folks are familiar with the Italian Autonomia movement or Antonio Negri. I look at actually how some of those ideas developed in Detroit in the 40s, and then how they changed when they moved from Detroit to another auto capital of those years, which was Turin, Italy. And then through various channels such as Wages for Housework or the Midnight Notes Collective came back to the United States. And part of the reason I chose that subject is because at 17, as a young activist, I accidentally walked into the office of feminist scholar Silvia Federici and was introduced to that entire current. So since I identify within that tradition and I'm close to many of the major figures in that tradition, it was kind of natural to document it. Also, no one has documented that before, so it gives me a real opportunity to put out a anti-authoritarian Marxist current to a wider audience that might know, like, say, historian Peter Linebaugh or feminist Silvia Federici, but don't understand that they're part of a kind of larger theoretical tradition. So it gives me the opportunity to do that. And in fact, I begin in Detroit in the 40s with Grace Lee Boggs and C.L.R. James. And it's important to note that today Grace Lee Boggs is 100 years old. So that's what my work looks at. And I also am looking at somewhat of a small current. There's basically 5 cities, 5 journals, 5 organizations, and it's a really good test run for how ideas translate and don't translate as they move from one context to another. So it's basically, that's the geographical component, but most of us academic geographers either do horrible things, working for the U.S. military or for tech companies, and a handful of us have kind of snuck in under the radar to do radical and hopefully useful work.
So I know very, very little about anything that you just talked about.
Okay.
I'm going to be completely honest about that. Like, when it comes to Marxism and communism, especially like here in the U.S. and how the different movements have formed, I know very, very little.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can mention just kind of briefly. So in Detroit in the 1940s and 50s, there was a great migration, of course, from the South. So predominantly African Americans were entering the city, and were entering the city before that. And we're getting positions within the auto factories and within kind of the secondary industries at a different pay scale. And also we're working the most, I'd say, kind of difficult and dangerous jobs. So kind of in the early years of the Black Power movement, there was a series of actions and organizing being done in those auto factories. So our understanding of white privilege theory, for instance, comes out of some of the work being done in this period. So the question was, are African-American workers in the auto factories and then the Black experience in general, are they autonomous from the larger kind of white working class struggle? And the conclusion by a multi-ethnic and international group who was focused in Detroit, so C.L.R. James Trinidadian Marxist who was a former Trot, Grace Lee Boggs, who is a noted Chinese-American revolutionary, and Marty Glaberman, who was actually a former auto worker that became a scholar. And what this group was looking at was how African Americans were functioning autonomously within the factory system. So they had their own forms of organization, their own forms of communication. And in looking at that, they discovered that very often white working class folks had the same thing. So beginnings of autonomous Marxism in some ways, and I don't want to tell an origin story since origin stories are always oversimplified, but they started to look at how outside of the union, outside of the political party, outside of the official organizations of the left, people are not stupid, and people are not just simply accepting not just the process and of production and the imposition of work, but they're actually organizing production in various ways in order to decrease its effects. So, for instance, there's many a story about that worker who would come to work a little hungover, and his comrades, and predominantly in the auto factories, it was male industrial workers, would reorganize production for the day so this person wouldn't lose their job. So certainly that minor reorganization of production for hungover worker is not the revolution, but this group of individuals was seeing that this was the kernel of various other forms that could arise. Mm-hmm. So by autonomous Marxism, we mean that the working class is actually not just autonomous from the official organizations of the left, but they are also autonomous from the from capital. It's not simply that we react as members of the working class or members of oppressed populations to capital, but in fact, capital is constantly trying to reorganize ourselves into production or into particular forms of life. And this kind of emphasis has carried through really until the present. So we also believe that the working class is really broadly defined, that any population that suffers the imposition of work, which is, so for instance, unwaged housewives is somewhat of a tired and old category, but there's plenty of unpaid work that all of us do in order just to survive or head to work the next day. Students are clearly working in preparation for a future career. Peasants are working, et cetera, et cetera. So we define the working class very broadly, and we also focus on what struggles are taking place and not necessarily and only the consciousness of workers themselves. So in a lot of ways, this tradition stands not just outside, but really against most of what Americans or for folks in North America would think of as Marxism, as communism, as a particular party formulation, or kind of an obsession with the industrial worker and hard work that will liberate us. So we are somewhat outside of that tradition, which is why so many anarchists have kind of taken up these ideas. So Silvia Federici wrote a book about 10, 15 years ago called Caliban and the Witch, where she looked at the dawn of capitalism and how the witch hunts were actually a way of destroying the indigenous and ways of life that women held, and the position of power that women held in peasant communities in Europe at that time. And the witch hunts were kind of a reaction to the level of power, the density of relationships. Women had a particular, quote-unquote, roles that were outside the kind of Judeo-Christian framework or the capitalist framework for women, and all those needed to be destroyed in order to create a housewife and a factory worker, and of course create a population that was easily exploitable and didn't have relations among itself. So, and as a feminist scholar, she's very interested in this, of course, because we're interested in how gender affects forms of work, kind of life activities, the limits, of course, placed on those. And Silvia is probably the best known of this current among contemporary anarchists because of this kind of feminist critique, or might be called like a materialist feminist critique. So I think anarchists have started to pick up on some of these ideas, partially because of Silvia, but also for the fact that there's not a ton of new kind of anarchist theorizing being done. I know there's a lot of imports, of course, from Europe and elsewhere, but we're not seeing, say, on AK or elsewhere, a lot of new anarchist ideas coming out. There is some development there, but I think there's definitely a lot of room for new ideas to circulate. And this is certainly one of those things that's circulating.
That's one of the things that I've noticed too, and I've kind of been waiting for kind of a resurgency of a little bit more coming out.
Yeah, certainly. It's somewhat troubling, actually, because I'm sure with the folks that you speak to all the time, I've toured on this book and I toured on a previous book. There's a lot of really amazing folks out there with amazing ideas. There's just not a lot of resources for folks to take the long periods of time needed and really the kind of grueling process of writing. I mean, to get away from work and other responsibilities for a period of time to write and express ideas is something that unfortunately a privileged few have access to. And really as a movement, we got to think about how new ideas are emerging and how we can support new voices. Of course, then, because of various forms of oppression and the limits of material existence, very often those producing new ideas are like myself, folks who had the privilege of going to college and then, of course, beyond that for higher degrees. And I'm given the flexibility, like this whole summer, I'm just writing. And I'm only able to do that because of the university. But I keep wondering how many voices we're not hearing because of the way things are currently structured. So how do we start supporting new voices and new ideas, especially from various oppressed communities who usually don't have the opportunity to express their ideas and their visions of a future and various other kinds of politics?
Do you think it's harder now for people to actually get their word out there, or do you think it's getting easier with like self-publishing and other presses and things like that?
I think it's kind of a little bit of both. Certainly the internet and some self-publishing has opened the possibility for new ideas to circulate. But, maybe this is me being somewhat of a crude Marxist, but the ideas need to be produced. Someone needs to sit there and write them. Someone needs to type them. Someone needs to print them. And all those, unfortunately, need both time and resources. And that's something that increasingly we don't have access to as radicals. I think that, there are a number of institutions we want to continue to support. AK Press is one, PM. There's a Little Black Card out there. There's a ton of different anarchist projects that whatever your particular anarchist proclivity is, there's going to be some kind of publishing project out there to support. There's also the Institute of Anarchist Studies, which is a granting institution that gives writers money. So I think that's a really important thing. But what I'm concerned about is the possibility that unless we're supporting folks as they're coming up as writers and coming up as thinkers, that we're not going to have new ideas being produced. And by that I mean, there's a really great statement by Buzz Osborne of the Melvins. And he was asked what happens when people stop buying records. And he makes his living by producing records and touring and playing in front of crowds. And he said, well, what's going to happen is that music's going to go out for free online. And that's great because a lot of people are going to get to hear our music that don't normally. What they don't understand is unless they buy our records, unless they buy our tickets, like we can't produce this music anymore. So I think that's starting to happen somewhat in the radical community and radical publishing. With that said, of course, blogs create the opportunity for people who might never, ever have entered the discourse to be able to do so. So I think it's still, jury is somewhat still out on that, on how these kind of changes in the media landscape and access to resources is going to affect these things. Of course, like book publishing is way down. Money being made for books is way down. The amount of publishers is way down. There's actually probably fewer publications on the radical left today than there have been in almost all of American history. Increasingly, so many of these publications, like Jacobin is a good example. It's a perfectly fine publication, but it's like obviously the Daily Worker, but non-existent party. So you have these like very self-selective publications and very self-selective blogs, and people then in turn, when they're reading, are really self-selective. So I wonder how often folks are actually being turned on to new ideas and new ways of thinking about the world in looking at the same old publications or in the same old blogs. And by that, it seems with the kind of like endless opportunity to publish on a blog and the endless opportunity to read all kinds of things from a blog, unfortunately, some of the media studies that have come out recently are showing that people just basically go to the same place over and over again for their source of news. Like elderly white people go to Fox News, young white progressives go to HuffPo, right? Like they go back to the same location. They're usually getting these already kind of self-selected ideas. And as radicals that have a very limited opportunity to get our ideas out there in the world, yes, anyone can Google us and find us, but how do we know they're going to possibly do that? So I think there's a real problem there that is going to have to be overcome.
You know, it's one of the things that we face a little bit. A lot of people don't realize, you know, a lot of this content like you're talking about, like these blogs and everything else, it's free content that gets put out there, but it does cost us time and money, like a shit ton of time and money to produce. And, you know, it's just like what you're saying. It's a privilege to be able to have that time to be able to do it. But unfortunately, a lot of people just don't.
And unless we start like addressing that organizationally, I mean, there's a good example with Truman Capote when he wrote In Cold Blood. He got the money from that for writing one article for like the New Yorker and another one for Playboy, right? Like he wrote 2 fucking articles and then had enough money for 1 to 2 years to write a book. Like that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, those publications pay the same rate as they do in the 60s. You know, like $1 a word then and $1 a word now ain't the same fucking dollar. So
yeah,
it's a real problem if, like, say, quote unquote, to be a working writer. And I'm increasingly concerned that we're just not hearing voices from press communities that we really need to be hearing.
You know, I can't imagine how much time it actually takes to write. Because like I look at like what we do, and for about every hour of content we put out, there's probably 5 to 7 hours of legwork for that 1 hour. And writing just must be tremendously more.
I mean, just the Life During Wartime book, for instance, the chapter I have in there, I've had a real responsibility for the community that I was speaking about, the defendant, to get the information not just accurate, but correct, and put forth a political position that wasn't necessarily just my own, but was representative of the work that was being done during that time period. And I was working a full-time job doing 60 hours a week in heavy manufacturing at the time. And it took me 3 months of almost every evening and weekend to knock that thing out. It's great. I'm glad it's out there in the world, and hopefully people are reading that in the other chapters, the other really fantastic chapters in the book. But, you know, I am one of 24 people who contributed, and each of us are doing that. Not to mention the editors who have to go back and forth with contributors, sometimes work with writers who don't really have a lot of experience, but whose voices we want to make sure we're hearing. So it's really an endless process. I mean, for a short book review, for instance, which I'm going to publish in an academic publication, it's 500 words, so that ain't shit. But in between reading the book and writing the review and dealing with some obnoxious editor who like wants to make sure I cite their bullshit, you know, I'm talking days of work, which, you know, supposedly academics are paid to teach and then should have extra time to do their own reading and writing. And that's just not true anymore, especially those who are doing critical or radical work, or those who come from oppressed communities or from working class communities. So even in those like privileged positions in the academy, there's less and less and less of those. So yeah, these are real concerns.
Well, speaking of Life During Wartime, how did that whole project come about?
So Will, who was one of the editors you spoke very kindly of previously, and his co-editor, Christian, held a conference here in Portland at Reed University. So they brought together folks like Eric McDavid's support committee, a number of academics. They brought together folks who were fighting against repression in Minneapolis. They brought Claude Marx from the Freedom Archives, who's a former political prisoner himself. And these various presentations focused not just on repression, but really the kind of shifts in the state's strategy to what they're calling counterinsurgency. I can define that for you all in a second. But this was an initial conference that was basically between academics and activists trying to figure out what's going on and how we can actually fight repression. I mean, this is now 2015, so the conference, good God, was 4 years ago, and the book took really about 2.5 years to come out. So there was a lot of interest, not just locally, but nationally for that conference. So the organizers got a lot of emails saying, hey, it's really great that we're talking about not just like the Green Scare, which is really important, the repression of animal rights activists, but we want to look at this at kind of a broader scope. What's taking place in the state? What is the state's strategy around insurgencies? So this was an opportunity for folks to come together and discuss that. And then from that kind of core group of folks who contributed chapters out of the talks they give, which is where mine started, they recruited a number of other individuals who were working on issues of both repression and resisting counterinsurgency, which of course is the subtitle to the book. So that's really kind of its origin stories.
So would you mind like going into a little bit of like the details of what you wrote about in the book and just for people that don't know what it is?
Certainly. Why don't I give a quick little synopsis of what the book is on and what's in the book?
Yeah. Okay.
Just because folks might not be familiar with counterinsurgency and counterinsurgency strategy. So, of course, counterinsurgency is military jargon. Comes right out of the U.S. Army Field Manual. And increasingly, not just since Vietnam, but of course since September 11th, we're seeing a lot of police militarization, relationships developing between the military and the police in order to pacify and occupy Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. military looked to local and domestic police forces for how to institute counterinsurgency strategies, anti-gang strategies, and they utilize that for these foreign invasions. So there's been this kind of feedback mechanism between the military-industrial complex and military think tanks and the actual on-the-ground military forces and domestic policing here in the United States. And a lot of those strategies, of course, don't just stay in the foreign theater. They've been coming back here in the U.S. as well. So by counterinsurgency, and this is right out of the U.S. Army Field Manual, they mean counterinsurgency is a military, paramilitary, political, economic, psychological, and civic actions taken by a government to defeat insurgency. And the manual goes on to talking about what, in fact, is insurgency, and there's basically 3 levels. And they don't clarify what kind of insurgency they're talking about. They're not saying, an insurgency of ISIS in Iraq and Kurdish territories. They're not saying, quote-unquote, gangs. They're actually grouping all these folks together in a really troubling manner. And there's 3 levels of insurgency. The first, of course, is a proto-insurgency. That's when individuals are starting to come together and might be taking various kinds of actions. Then that moves on, of course, to kind of more overt types of activity. And really, the counterinsurgency strategies prevent that proto-insurgency. Say a small group such as the ELF, which was, in fact, not really that small of a group, that small of a network, rather. They want to make sure that does not become a small insurgency where they're starting to get adherents that are outside their own initial networks. Because from that second stage, then there's kind of a more generalized insurgency where you have larger swaths of the population identifying with the insurgents themselves. So we can almost argue that the state has moved to a permanent repression process where no longer is an insurgency, say a protest or a riot, quote unquote, something that happens kind of out there once in a while as tensions mount and the like, but rather they see this as a just functional operation of society. These are ongoing struggles that are taking place, and in order for the state to manage those ongoing struggles, the state requires permanent repression. Counterinsurgency is part of that permanent repression strategy. So maybe I should stop there in case there's any need for clarification before I go on to talk about my chapter.
No, I think that's pretty good.
That's clear? Okay. And, of course, all this stuff is easily available online. Folks can pick up the book and get some better reflections on this than I've just given. So the chapter that I wrote about was about what we call like a pre-Green Scare case. In 2000, the work I was doing in suburban Long Island, I and many, many other folks came under surveillance. It was quite clear they weren't too subtle about the surveillance that they were putting us under. At the same time, there was a Animal Defense League on Long Island was involved in a number of different exciting campaigns, and they too, of course, came under surveillance. And then In 2001, one of our core organizers was arrested. It took 3 years to go to trial, and in 2004, we had a 2-week trial where he was found innocent. And part of the reason that we wanted to include this chapter here is that he's one of the only people in this kind of recent period of repression that has been targeted, been charged, and actually was not just found innocent at trial, but never served any jail time. Unfortunately, that's somewhat of an anomaly. I'm sure, as you know, and discussed at length with Eric McDavid, too often our comrades and colleagues are going to jail when charged under these not just new statutes, but under this kind of period of repression that we can start to, we start to see developing in the 2000s, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. So this case, we in fact actually didn't talk about publicly for a very, very long time. The conference had read about 5 years ago, and then the chapter that came out 2 years ago is the first time we've spoken publicly about the case, partially out of respect for the family and the defendant, but partially because there was still concern that, the FBI has got a long memory. They've charged Black Panthers and former Black Panthers 30, 40 years after the supposed crime was committed. So we want to avoid, any kind of further entanglements by putting something in a chapter or putting something out there publicly that could be used against not just the defendant, but the comrades involved in his defense campaign. So we were very intent about taking our time with this work. Though I think it's important to note that why we didn't talk about this publicly at conferences or, put out various articles. There were 4 pieces produced around the time of the trial, 2 by a friend of ours who's an anarchist and a journalist in New York City, one by Andy, who unfortunately then became a member of the Shack 7, and I produced one as well that ran in the Earth First Journal. So we put out a few things just so that folks could get some of the political lessons, if not all the details of the case. And both I and the defendant met with Daniel McGowan when he was under house arrest. We met with some of the members of Marius Mason's support committee, and we spoke to various others throughout the years who were facing repression. As I said earlier, the organizing that we were doing on Long Island as a self-identified anarchist group came under surveillance, and then, of course, the Animal Defense League, because we were the only 2 radical groups on that suburban sandbar. And we were in touch, of course, with Andy from the Shack 7 since we grew up with him about the case. So he was very well versed in that, and any lessons from it that might have been useful for the Shack 7 defense. So we certainly made ourselves available to folks, but decided not to necessarily broadcast it until an acceptable period of time had come to a close. So that's what kind of took the delay in getting the story out there, because really I'm talking about something that's 10, 15 years old at this point. So let me take a step back and provide a little bit of a chronology. On April 11th, 1998, a group of radicals came together on suburban Long Island. These were predominantly working class and lower middle class kids, most of them from the DIY punk or related countercultural scenes. And they were involved in anything from Food Not Bombs to anti-racist action to the industrial workers of the world. So the kind of alphabet soup and usual suspects for radical politics. And we decided that our individual initiatives really were not enough, and we had to come together and create somewhat of an overarching organization for Long Island. At that time, besides the ADL, there was absolutely nothing on the left of any kind of substantive interest in suburban Long Island. So it's a place of nearly 3 million people. It takes hours to drive from one end to the other. And in this huge territory, not too far from New York City, there was really no kind of oppositional movement. There was a couple of little left groups. There was a really exciting and strong day labor workers center and immigrant rights movement. There was, of course, some really exciting projects around the hip-hop community and various African-American communities there on Long Island. But we were the only suspects for being involved in anarchist or self-identified anarchist activities. So we created an organization to work with day laborers locally, to be in solidarity with those struggles. Our Food Not Bombs chapters went from 1 or 2 to 7 at its height. We held regular do-it-yourself flea markets, educational events, and then, of course, as the anti-globalization movement picked up, we involved ourselves in those activities as well. So we predate Seattle by a few months, but it feels like those were a few years, and how much we had to learn about organizing and participating in really, at that point, a global movement. So from suburban Long Island, we'd often head into New York City or to Washington, D.C. to partake in large street protests, reclaim the streets actions, critical mass actions. And we decided that we were kind of tired of traveling and we needed to do this in Long Island, where we actually live. So for May 2000, we decided to have what I can deem as probably the only suburban Reclaim the Streets ever to take place. And we shut down a major town in Long Island for the afternoon to protest global capitalism as part of a national and international day of action. Our defendant, of course, was part of this particular action, one of our core organizers. As it turned out, he climbed to the top of the tripod that we deployed in the middle of this town. And the reason that he got that job was because none of us could actually climb up there. There for a period of time.
He drew the short stick, basically.
Yeah, it was a real short list of who could do it, unfortunately. So due to his physical capabilities, he was given that task on the day of the action. What we found out later in discovery and trial, he was targeted by local police and then, of course, the FBI because of the fact that he was on top of that tripod. Secondly, we unveiled a banner. This is what democracy looks like, which was a common slogan of the anti-globalization movement that we had stolen as well. And one of the A's had a circle around it. Which eventually actually was used at trial as well against us to say that we were part of this violent anarchist gang, et cetera, et cetera. So at that Reclaim the Streets action, the defendant and 24 other folks were arrested. It was very clear that they had been following us leading up to that action. They had called our action helpline to offer any assistance. The cops had followed and videotaped us during that time period. We gathered there was a couple of plants at the action, and all this, of course, would play into what would take place later. So I'm talking May 2000. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, there's the RNC and DNC that summer. We had 60 organizers on the ground in Philadelphia for the Republican National Convention. We participated in the lockdown and shut down one of the freeway on-ramps during the convention protests. We found out later, of course, that we were under surveillance there as well. And then we headed back to Long Island to kind of regroup and figure out what we were doing, because all this running around to do actions elsewhere, and even the Reclaim the Streets protest that we held to shut down a town was quote-unquote successful, but only successful in a limited way. And we weren't seeing how those things were actually going to improve the quality of life for working class, poor, and oppressed folks in suburban Long Island. So we kind of reorganized ourselves and held a conference to discuss, where we wanted to go as a organization and as a movement. And at that particular conference, which was held on Labor Day of 2000, it was pretty obvious the police were or some other federal agency was observing us. There were folks in the parking lot taking pictures. There was someone parked across the street filming us, et cetera, et cetera. Around the same time, one of our members was approached by the FBI and asked to join. This individual was arrested both in Long Island and in Philadelphia. He had called his partner from Philadelphia to discuss the fact that they were about to have a child together. He was 19, he was quite young, and as an expected father, the FBI thought they could use that against him and offer him money to join the ELF. So the odd thing in this story is that there were no ELF actions on Long Island at this time. ELF actions started taking place 2 to 3 months after this individual was approached and after the surveillance started on us. All this, of course, only came out in discovery and trial. We kind of had suspicions, but it was confirmed then. So a series of ELF actions took place in suburban Long Island, mostly way out on eastern Long Island in about a 5-mile radius. over a period of a few months. So technically they started in late September, but we don't really have confirmation on that action. A series of tires were slashed, gas tanks filled with sugar, and then increased, and there was a number of arsons that took place on housing developments. So for those not familiar, Long Island is the suburban experiment. So in the 1950s, tract housing was first built in suburban Long Island in a little town called Levittown. It was a whites-only community. Long Island is the second most segregated place in the country after Detroit, or at least during the time period that I'm speaking of, it was. It might not be now. So there's a number of major social issues that take place in that area. So suburban sprawl is certainly one of them. Long Island was noted for potato farms. There's a Long Island cheese pumpkin, which is kind of a round Thanksgiving pumpkin that was grown there for years. The kind of only claim to fame I think that we have. That's actually something good. But there was a lot of suburban development taking place during these years. So farmland was being bulldozed over. The LF launched a series of actions kind of in that environment. And there is really no other environmental movement whatsoever. One of the leading progressive organizations actually had an office at the nuclear power plant they were going to be building. So, because I can't remember the combination. Basically, Soviets need power, and they need nuclear power. So these progressives thought they were going to move towards some kind of new progressive society through nuclear power, which is a terrible, terrible fucking idea. So that was the, quote unquote, left or loyal opposition. So there really was no other environmental movement on Long Island to really address these issues. So the ELF took place, a number of actions under the ELF banner took place in November and December of 2000. Well, by early January, there's actually national media attention directed toward Long Island for these actions. So 60 Minutes had a major piece, the tagline of which was that environmental terrorists are even coming for you in the suburbs. And that tagline was used actually on the night of the last arson that took place on Long Island. And then the New York Newsday, which at that time was the third largest circulated paper in the country, was having editorial after editorial and cover story after cover story about these actions. The FBI was clearly under a lot of pressure to address this, and they ended up initially arresting 3 individuals. These 3 were all high school students. They were all underage, 2 of which had parents who were police officers. Supposedly, there was a 3rd individual, a woman who was only named Courtney in any of the documents that we've seen, but we don't know if that's her actual name. Not only was she friends with these 3 individuals, but her father was actually part of the investigation into these actions for the FBI and local police forces, for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So kind of an odd 4th figure here in the story. This person, quote unquote, Courtney, and I'm only identifying them with that name because that's the only name we saw in the court records, and their father was a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So it's kind of odd that that nothing was ever heard about this person again. And of course, we only discovered this when the prosecutor turned over discovery, and then when we were actually in the midst of trial. So of these 3 individuals who cooperated, 2 testified against our comrade and the defendant, both of which testified at trial, both of which recanted on the stand. The first one to speak, in fact, Jared McIntyre, he walked into the courtroom to testify in an orange jumpsuit. And the reason for that is he was given a 1-year perjury charge in this case. So he was arrested. He signed an agreement with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office that he'd be testifying against this well-known above-ground activist. He then went on Instant Messenger when AOL was a thing and communicated with a ADL activist and mentioned to the ADL activist that the defendant, who the FBI was trying to charge our comrade was in fact innocent. So this cooperating witness was, because he provided information to an outside source that was against what he had testified to, which we believe is false, that this our comrade and defendant was involved in these actions, that he was given a perjury charge to discipline him in this case. So when a cooperating witness shows up in orange jumpsuit and has to admit that they have already committed perjury in this case, they don't make a good witness. And then they recanted on the stand and said this person, in fact, had nothing to do with it. The second witness, Matthew Ramelkamp, was on cross-examination admitted that the FBI had coerced him into choosing this above-ground activist. So it's our speculation from both testimony and from scuttlebutt that the reason that this above-ground activist was charged was, one, that he was well-known in the community, two, that he was over 18, and at that point the FBI looked pretty fucking foolish that 3 kids that were more into Beavis and Butthead than they were into ecological or animal liberation kept them on the run for a number of months, and very clearly they needed an adult to pin this on. It couldn't simply be that 3 kids read something on the web and then decided to take action. Also, they rolled pretty fucking quick. So, this quote unquote conspirator, our comrade, was targeted for probably a number of these reasons. So the second witness, Ramelkamp, recanted on the stand, said that the defendant had nothing to do with it, stated that the FBI had coerced him. But probably the most interesting testimony was from the FBI agent in charge of the case. So he wasn't even asked a question by the defense attorney in regards to have you gone to Seattle? Have you observed other kind of activist activities? But he went on this kind of really weird rant when asked about if he'd seen a Circle A before, about how he was flown to Seattle after the protest there, and then to the site of the RNC in Philadelphia and the DNC just the year prior in Los Angeles. So this individual was flown around, shown all kinds of anarchist symbols as a way of preparing them for going after above ground and underground activists. So it was quite clear that they were tying the Circle A that was on the flag that we unveiled at our May Day street action to the Circle A that was tattooed on the defendant's arm, to the Circle A that was spray painted at some of the ELF action sites. So the simplicities of the federal government's understanding of radical politics did not work in our favor when they said these 3 Circle A's are the same Circle A. And when the person who can climb to the top of a tripod is obviously the leader because they are physically higher than the rest of us. It's just totally fucking absurd. Defies logic. It would be a funny story if it wasn't so fucking tragic and miserable. Mm-hmm. But it was very clear that they were kind of tying all these things together. And I think that's an important lesson for radical movements, that the government does not distinguish between above ground and underground. The government does not distinguish between various kind of sects or in-friend groups or various currents within anarchism. I mean, the state utilizes what's at its disposal and what it can, find through surveillance toward repression, and that's what they did in this case. Luckily, we had a well-known NYU professor, Stephen Duncombe, who's done a lot of writing on zines and radical movements. His dissertation, actually, and his first book was on fanzines. He showed up to testify in court with a couple thousand pages from anywhere from High Times to Hot Topic with the Circle A. Like kids' bibs, baby pajamas, all kinds of things with the Circle A. And he's like, look, the symbol does not mean what you fucking think it means. So we're able to really kind of create a counter narrative in the courtroom against what the prosecutor and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI was trying to sell to the jury. So some of those things were really kind of amazing to see. in person in the way that the state kind of very, very strongly stuck to its problematic and simplistic story. And luckily, we ended up with an amazing defense attorney, a man by the name of Frederick Brewington. And Fred Brewington actually worked on the COINTELPRO papers with William Kunstler. He was really well known on Long Island for civil rights cases, African-American man himself. And for the fact that we had someone who was not part of our quote-unquote radical community defending us, and someone who's so well known, actually I think very much played in our favor. We did not have a movement attorney, and we did not have a kind of a comrade who was doing it for free. We had an attorney who was not just dedicated to the defendant and to the case, but really the larger community that was facing this repression. So we met with him numerous times. We helped him build what he called a counter narrative. So unlike a lot of cases of repression that have happened before and since, we decided not to speak to the media. We made absolutely no statements whatsoever to the mainstream media. There were a number of radical articles that appeared in the Earth's First Journal and elsewhere around this time about the case, which I'll comment in a second. But for the most media period. And this was at the request of our attorney. He stated that the case would be fought in the courtroom, not in the court of public opinion. And you have to remember that, we're talking in and around September 11th. So to go back to my chronology, the defendant was arrested on the 15th of February, 2001. Of course, a few months later, September 11th happened. He was then charged under the new statute that passed immediately after September 11th on the 19th of September, 2001. So, to our knowledge, he's the first person in the United States to be charged as a terrorist under these new statutes. And he wasn't charged in Utah, and he wasn't charged in Oregon. He was charged in fucking Long Island, where a good portion of the people who died in the trade towers actually lived. So, to charge someone as a terrorist under these new statutes and try to link the two in people's minds was really fucking scary. Of course, scary for him and his family, but definitely scary for the community around him. And our concern was like, good God, we're never going to get a fucking jury that is not going to convict this person if the feds can logically link, quote unquote, eco-terrorism to what happened on September 11th. Luckily, the trial took place in 2004, so there was a number of years in between those periods. And this counter narrative that the defense attorney was telling as part of the defense strategy and part of our story was even more important because of the context, right? 3 years after September 11th, taking place among a jury of who might have friends and family who died in the Trade Center when the towers collapsed. And I think the environment there was really, really fucking scary. And I don't want to downplay the concern and the fear that people experience when repression happens elsewhere at other times and places. But for us at this particular time, it was very, very worrisome. So having a defense attorney that could kind of sell our story was something that we thought was really important and something that he did so well that we won the case. But as part of the story, he explained what we did. So we had a number of witnesses, including the organizational member who was approached to join the ELF even before the ELF announced itself on Long Island. We showed a documentary film that was made about our work that was actually the same action that the police videotaped and showed. So he was able to illustrate that we were above ground activists that were partaking in various, sometimes illegal in the sense of civil disobedience, but predominantly social service and community organizing initiatives. And partially as a result of the kind of organizing they were to do, the courtroom was filled with various kinds of supporters. So it wasn't just a bunch of punk kids who, went and bought court clothes at a thrift store, right? So we had white-haired old peace activists. We had members of the Workplace Project, which was a day labor worker center, which we worked with for a number of years. They closed down for numerous days throughout the trial and came in mass. So predominantly El Salvadorian day laborers. We had clergy. We had folks from the African American community. We had all kinds of activists and concerned community members, certainly a number of academics who came out, and every single day of trial, not only were all the seats filled, but there usually was an overflow into the hallway itself. This response was surprising both to the prosecution and the judge. The judge actually had commented, and I was able to read in the court transcripts on, where the hell did all these people come from? Why are these people here? No one comes to observe court cases anymore. What's the deal? But really, most importantly, the jury had to walk through this crowd of 100 to 200 people every day who were not the usual suspects. But it's also important not just to be vigilant in the community when you're being surveilled or you're concerned that the community and organization and the community you're part of is under surveillance, but we were hyper-vigilant in the courtroom itself. At two separate instances took place where clear plants were sent in and wanted to join in the midst of trial the organization. A number of us were followed home throughout that whole process. We prepared meals both for the defendant and his family, as well as the supporters throughout trial, and they very clearly had plants that try to participate in those meals. But all that paid off because actually the defendant's mother ended up riding the elevator with one of the jurors, and the juror turned to another juror and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if these kids hate our country so much, they should go over to Iraq and find out what freedom is. Well, the defendant's mother, of course, being vigilant herself, turned this information over to our defense attorney. And the next day, this juror was thrown off. So make sure mom is riding elevators and is at all your court dates, because you never know how these things are going to pan out. And that certainly was a major victory. I mean, if this person was on the jury, who knows if we would have actually ended up with a not guilty verdict. But there was another important development at trial that pointed to the level at which the federal authorities were willing to go to put this person away for a crime that not only have they always maintained their innocence of, but I think very clearly in the chapter I proved their innocence. So as part of the discovery, the FBI and the Attorney General's office turned over a videotape of our defendant filling up his truck at a gas station. He pulled in, he filled up his truck, he went in to buy smokes, he came back out, he finished his fill up, he pulled away. And in the tape that was turned over to the defense attorney, there were two shadowy figures with him when he was filling up. It was really odd. It was a bad videotape. The prosecution did not show the videotape during trial itself. Rather, they showed stills from that videotape, which had our defendant and then some shadowy figures around the car. Well, after the jury went out, they requested that videotape. So let me recap. There was a videotape turned over to the defense attorney in discovery that was disconcerting. We know for a fact that this individual filled up and there was no one else there. That would kind of might have looked that way on the tape. The prosecutor entered in evidence both that tape, but only showed these photos, the stills from the video camera that kind of, were blurry and unclear. So the jury asked for the videotape. They wanted the original source. Well, one day around 4 o'clock toward the end of trial, it must have been the trial ended in 8 days, so much of it in the seventh day. The prosecution is queuing up the tape. Our defense attorney and his second chair are kind of watching what's going on. And they discover that the tape they're queuing up is a different tape. That it was very clear that the tape turned over in discovery, the tape entered in evidence, and the tape that was used to develop these stills that were entered in evidence were actually doctored. So the defense attorney viewed the tape with the prosecutor and the judge. The judge determined that the evidence was doctored, and they threw it out. They couldn't tell the jury this, of course, because the jury had already been given the case. But the jury came back in, and the judge instructed the jury that they can no longer consider that evidence. And literally within an hour later, they came back with a non-guilty verdict. So
Wow.
on pretty much every level, we got fucking lucky. I'm hoping that our defense strategy was smart, but it really was the vigilance of all of our members, of the defendant's mother, of our defense attorneys that resulted in this not guilty verdict. And I think part of that pressure was put on so they could be vigilant due to the kind of community organizing and relationships we had built prior to the period of repression. And one of the things I really try to conclude the chapter in is that once a period of repression starts to take place, very often organizations contract, right? Organizations begin to focus, or friendship networks begin to focus on defense, which is obviously super important.
Mm-hmm.
During this time period, we actually expanded considerably. We had shifted from more of a protest, militant anarchist approach to more of a community organizing approach. So in the 3 years waiting for trial, we, in fact, increased our membership considerably. And before that, and during the lead up to trial, we developed a lot of relationships and further the relationships we had with the peace community, of which we agree on pretty much nothing, the Labor Workers Center and various others. And all this mattered because all these folks fucking showed up at court. It's one thing to look at a group of punk kids. It's another thing to look at a really diverse group of people, especially a whole bunch of old people and clergy in habits and collars. We were really able to show to the judge, prosecutor, and of course the jury that this individual had a huge amount of community support. That support ended up with this defense attorney. That support ended up providing meals for the family and supporters throughout trial. It's also important to mention that while we shifted from that militant anarchist approach to more community organizing approach, right before this period of repression took place, we actually were able to pay both the defendant and myself as a full-time nonprofit staff member throughout trial. So I functioned as a full-time paid staff member to organize court support, and we're able to pay the defendant throughout this course as well. So the fact that we had amassed some considerable resources, had formed a nonprofit organization, and had vast community support meant that we were able to do a lot of things as a support group that maybe other support groups don't have the resources to do. So,
with all of that in mind, do you feel like this case will maintain like just as a statistical outlier compared to like all the other ones, or do you think that there'll be more of a trend where people can really fight the repression in the courts?
I really don't know. So part of the issue that comes up for me, and this is part of my training as a geographer, is no time and space is identical to another time and space, mm-hmm. right? So if the same trial had taken place at the same time on the West Coast, even under some of the similar conditions, say the defendant had the support of a nonprofit who could fund a whole bunch of shit behind it, had huge swath of community support, had an amazing defense attorney, and it very well could have had a different outcome. So I'm very concerned about generalizing this particular case. It's also sad that this took place between 2001 and 2004, and we're talking 10 years later, and we don't have another example mm-hmm. of someone winning either at court or having charges dropped. That's not to say that, we have not fucking won. The fact that you had Eric McDavid on 2 shows ago is part of, is one of the examples of Sacramento prisoner support and people all around the country and world supporting Eric and getting his ass out of jail sooner than really any of us expected. So we have won.
I was going to say that what's interesting to me is, I don't know if you're familiar with my personal case, but
this is Jeremy.
Yeah, this is Jeremy, by the way. I also actually had all my charges dropped in pre-trial when I was facing persecution for a mink liberation, and that was 2001. I want to say.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. It was 2001. And this is the only other case I've ever heard of, but, this case went full to trial.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I'm actually surprised that, before this, maybe we hadn't been in touch, right? I mean,
yeah.
Unfortunately, some of the emphasis when we win goes back to the fact that we still have so many comrades, both from this period of repression and from the 60s, still in jail.
Yeah,
and I think we need to really start accumulating these wins. Part of the reason that I focused on innocence in this chapter, that Connor maintained his innocence and we won that at trial, is to provide that for others who might want to state that claim as well. I'm sure we all agree that innocence is not important to the state, certainly, and does not determine who and who we don't support. But part of the reason I wanted to mention it here is to offer that as another example if people so choose to use that in the future. In regards to the organizing strategy we chose, I think a lot of folks have try to do some other things, build various community support. I think the lesson for us was we built it before the repression took place. And as a result, the folks that we recruited to do support work from outside of our immediate circles, they didn't look at this as a ideological or political question. They look at this as a personal question. This person I know, who I fucking care about, who I might disagree or even argue with, who I've worked with, who's stood there with me at actions defending day laborers, for instance, or protesting the construction of a new jail. This person that I know is facing this. Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, that personal relationship matters. That doesn't mean that we should all run off immediately and start spending time with the timid and loyal opposition on the left. But we have to, communicate with forces around us in a substantive way. So when repression does hit, and as I started with talking about counterinsurgency in the state of permanent repression, we have to expect this is going to happen again. And being that right now we're maybe as a movement shifting to long-term political prisoner support with some of the prisoners, such as Marius Mason, who will be in unfortunately, for quite a few years into the future. Mm-hmm. I know that there was just a recent Midwest case where 2 individuals are going to be serving some jail time, unfortunately, but we haven't seen big operations like Operation Backfire, the Shack case, in a number of years. And this might be part of the time to start rethinking strategies, how we're going to go into the next and should be expected period of repression that is going to come down the pike. I hope that this case is somewhat helpful for that, but of course, each support group and each community and each, Anarchist Black Cross local, for instance, needs to think this for themselves. It's not something that, maybe we can even decide on a national basis, and certainly not in a discussion like this. These are on-the-ground conversations that need to be rethought and re-theorized. And hopefully a book like this is just an opportunity to kind of have those conversations.
What really struck me about reading your chapter in particular in this book was it really made it personal to me, because one of the actions that were taking place was when all of my stuff was going on, and the ELF communication actually used my name as in solidarity of it. Mm-hmm. And that actually really hurt me in my case, to put it mildly. And I kind of forgotten about it until I was rereading it, and it kind of re-brought those emotions up.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that?
What about?
No, in the sense of how you felt it hurt and.
Oh no! I mean, it was the prosecution actually used it as a reason not to reduce my bail at the time. They were fighting bail reduction hearings. They were actually they actually used it against me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean these things are somewhat troubling. I mean so to go back to my chronology, the ELF actions on Long Island took place between, say, late September, but really November and December of 2000. The last action took place in January.
Yeah.
These individuals, the 3 cooperating witnesses, were arrested and started cooperating in January. Our defendant, our comrade, was arrested on February 15th. So even before he was arrested, it was out there just simply in the mainstream media that could come up in a fucking 5-second Google search whatever the hell the search engine was back then, would find out that these people were cooperating. But the Earth First Journal put out 2 separate publications stating that we need to support all, quote unquote, 4 of these defendants, meaning the 3 cooperating witnesses and the defendant. So the prosecution didn't use it and probably didn't find it. But we sure should need to be pretty fucking careful about what goes out there in, the radical media, which is supposedly out there to not just defend but get support for these individuals. I mean, the ELF Journal stated in 2 separate articles these people are all part of the same cell.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
It's fucking mind-boggling. And in fact, actually, I've spoken to since the person who was in charge of that, the paper and those articles at the time, and we've discussed it in detail, made mistakes I want to go back and fix. But, these errors that could go out there in the radical press that prevent you from getting a lower bail or actually being used as evidence in trial is something we really need to be careful about.
Yeah, I had a similar situation happen with me. They tried to bring it up in trial, but it was fortunately shot down. This is Jordan, by the way. And they said that that's just outside people doing something and there's no way connected to me. So it really just depends on who you get.
Yeah.
Right.
What's crazy to me though is the amount of support that you talk about. You don't see that support too much, in other cases. Well, they get a lot of support from the radical community themselves, but it's like you said, it's the punk rock kids going to the thrift store the day before and trying to get court apparel.
I mean, and even with those punk kids, we were really strict. We had a series of meetings and had like an agreed upon set of principles for court behavior and dress. As a collective and as a support committee, I think we had probably about a dozen meetings leading up to it. I mean, of course, just talk about some of the emotional issues that, fears that people had, the fact that people were being followed, right? Like, really took some time to go through some of those emotional issues because those things are important as well, and we don't want to downplay those, especially because very often it's those emotional issues that put people into crisis and then, of course, make them vulnerable to the state, and we want to avoid that as well. So it's not even just on the personal and human level we need to address this, but really as a strategic question. And we had decided as a group that no one was going to go into court not wearing a suit, even if we had to go fucking buy them for them, or quote unquote court acceptable clothes. Everyone was to be in ties and suits or nice pants tucked in. No one was to have fucking punk hair. No one was to have, a dye job. So we actually went out and procured court clothes for those who couldn't afford it. We had bought hair dye for people who needed it. We got a wig for someone who needed to, and didn't want to kind of dye or cut their hair or couldn't really cut it in any kind of, court acceptable, quote unquote way. And we had decided really that we are not there representing the fucking cause, and we're not there representing an organization, and we're not there representing ourselves. We're there representing the defendant, and that needs to be the focus. And entirely that was adhered to. And part of that, I think, kept the group really strong. We made sure that at every court break, 1 or 2 people was with the defendant to support them and their family and anything they needed. If they needed food, if they just needed an ear to, chew off, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that level of strength throughout the trial and leading up to the trial really kept that group together and really created a united front in court. I'm not saying that, other communities can't decide to do other things. This happened to be successful for us during that time. And I think part of these deliberations took place, one, because we had chosen more of a community organizing approach rather than a militant anarchist approach some years prior, or some months prior, rather. Really, some years prior by the time we got to trial. But, and these relationships that we developed, but we were so fucking scared, only 3 years away from September 11th, on a place where so many people had died on that date. So I think that made us kind of overly cautious in certain ways, and maybe that's useful for folks to consider in the future. So,
what was it like implementing the dress code for other people?
No one pushed back at all. Part of the thing too is that we were a pretty tight group already. Even though we had I'd say a core of around 60 people, and maybe about 150 participating in various activities at different levels. It was kind of a long consensus conversation, consensus process and conversation to get to that decision. So at that point, we had been participating in community dialogues for freaking years. We had these kind of roundtable, very Paulo Freirean, popular education style community dialogues. That was our organizing model. So people got to know each other really fucking well, and people got to know kind of the purpose of where the kind of mandate the group set was going. So we had these community dialogues. People got to know each other. The group set a mandate, had a purpose behind that mandate. And very often there were folks who disagreed, of course, as these things take place. But by the time we got to making a decision around a dress code, there was really nobody not on board. I think the person who we gave a wig to maybe needed a little more convincing than others, but I am pretty sure that if I remember correctly, there was really next to no pushback. You could be fucking not punk for 8 days out of your life to make sure your friend doesn't go to jail.
For sure.
And that was the decision I think we made. So,
well, how can people actually get a hold of your work and follow what you're currently doing?
Well, they can get a hold of this work that I'm talking about here with you all in Life During Wartime, Resisting Counterinsurgency. The editors are going to yell at me as I screw up the title. It's out on AK, of course. It has been for the last 2 years. Hopefully it's being read in not just my chapter, but there's a ton of other really amazing chapters in the book that are useful for folks thinking about this. I do a bunch of boring academic work, so don't bother Googling my name or reading that bullshit. But I'm part of a group called the Team Colors Collective. We write on contemporary movements, on issues of class, of capital, and you can find our work at warmachines.info. And if folks have any other questions or clarifying points from what I said or from the chapter, they're more than welcome to get in touch with us there.
One thing I wanted to say, one thing I love about the book Life During Wartime is that you can pick it up and just read a chapter at a time, and you don't have to read it in order. Like you can, kind of pick and choose what you want to go through. That's kind of how I've read it. So, but I really appreciate being able to do that in a lot of books.
Oh, certainly. I'm sure very few people, maybe only the editors have read it cover to cover. And hopefully folks can pick and choose things that are useful there. And of course, in Will Potter's amazing text as well to help think these things through. Sacramento Prisoner Support, who are the kind folks who put us in touch, have a book that's been circulating for some time on creating defense campaigns and the like. And that's available through them as well.
Well, we end every episode saying fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Fuck, shit, damn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Take care.
This week you heard
Tepid Code by Damiak.
Right now you're listening to
Sputter Star by Sugarpill.
Every week we say this, and I'm just going to do it again this week. So, iTunes. Just rate and review us on there. It helps the show out so fucking much. If you've already done it, high five again. You get high fives every week. If you've given a ghost review, you get double high fives.
If you haven't done it, what do you got to lose?
Yeah, it's free. Just takes a second of your time and helps the show. So, we put a lot of time into the show. Hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, give us an extra couple minutes and go give us some stars and maybe write a quick review saying, hey, I enjoy it.
And if you hate it, then why are you listening?
Especially to this part. If you made it this far, you kind of liked it. Let's just be honest.
A little bit.
Either that or you couldn't find the off button.
Which is fair.
Yeah. And
in that case, you probably can't rate and review anyway. So
yeah, you wouldn't know how if you can't find the off button. But just please, I'm pleading. And everyone that's done it, thank you so much. But, just help us out a little bit.
If you haven't already liked us or become our friend on social media, you should do so. We pretty much every day talk about things that we don't talk about on the show. So be our friend, like us, give us hugs online, and that's all you need to do.
This is a true story so far. Every person that's a friend with us on social media that I've met in real life, I've given a hug. Everyone.
I don't know if I have.
So if you want a hug from me, you got to be friends first. It's just how I roll.
It's true.
Yep. And I give good hugs, man. They're fucking good.
I don't know if I've ever hugged you. We've known each other a long time.
Yeah, I don't know if we have or not.
Huh.
I'm getting some nods that yes, we have, but I don't recall anything special.
Yeah,
that just means your hugs aren't anything special.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, they're amazing. Be our friends. Go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the social tab.
Fuck shit damn.
Fuck shit damn.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.